We'll start with public comment. If anyone in person would like to make public comment, you just need to state your name and town. And anybody online, if you would like to make public comment, please put your name and town in the chat so that we can see it. The chat feature will be closed after public comment. Anyone here to make public comment this evening? No for in person. Are there any public comments online? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment. Thank you. We do not have a student report tonight, but we will. Yep. We received a introduction. It is going to be Diego Sanson. Thank you. So he will be with us by our next meeting, which is wonderful. For my report tonight, it's brief, just letting you know that by way of information, the things that I have responded to since our last meeting. We had a request for our last meeting's video, but we had an error with the recording. So fortunately, we have Maria taking wonderful minutes, and that's no problem. And we're back up and running with recording tonight, so that's great. Had a couple emails come in with the link to the Boston Globe article about the turf field, PFAs, and that's, of course, our turf field situation has been process right now. So that's, we thank them for their contribution. Had one community member following up from the last meeting to make an appointment to meet and just chat. Going to do that this week. And a meeting with a neighboring district chairperson. So this I want to bring up as something that will include in my chairman's report. It was great to just get a sense of what some other people are doing and meet with her briefly. And one thing that she mentioned doing, I would like to introduce here in my chairman's report each time, is just reading off one of their operating protocols. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to do anything with it. These are the operating protocols that we were given over the summer. They were drafted in the summer session 2021, and we're still working with them, especially as we had questions this time around with the revisiting the start time. And, you know, there were questions of, well, what happens if I can't make it to a meeting, or what happens if I can't make it at this time, and that sort of thing. So I thought this might be something that would be good. So I will today do the intro in the first one, and then I will just invite someone each time to read the bulleted point that's next. We're just going to go right down line. It's not a pointed thing or anything. So for our protocols, as elected members of the Manchester Essex School Committee, we, along with the superintendent, accept the trust that has been placed in us to ensure that the students of our district receive the best possible education. We're continually focused on this goal at all times. We hereby commit to the following when conducting our business. We will, and in the category of support the educational welfare and well-being of all students, the first bullet is, represent the needs, interests, and achievement of all students in the district, and place the students' interests above all others in decisions while remaining within the limitations of a voter-approved budget. That is our first reading of a protocol during chairman's report, and we can expect that next time as well. That is it for my report for tonight. For the consent agenda, we do not have Avi here. We excuse Avi, but the consent agenda tonight includes 3 items. So an acceptance of the warrants. I'll get the details in a minute. Some minutes and an approval for out-of-state travel. But before we begin, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Excellent. Okay, so we don't need to tease that apart. So the acceptance of warrants will be the fiscal year 2023 voucher V 1014. The minutes are for September 6th and September 20th meetings, and the approval for out-of-state travel, which is standard and both at the high school level, the 9/11 memorial trip, and the debate team travel. We've all had our chance to ask questions and things, so I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Don't all jump at once. Thank you. Any discussion? All in
I'm
favor?
happy to see students traveling again.
Indeed, indeed. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous, motion carries. Thank you all. Subcommittee reports. We have no reports for the facilities subcommittee at this point. Our finance subcommittee does have a report. So Anna's going to report out on the subcommittee meeting that we had yesterday, and I'll report first on the collaborative group meeting that we had a week ago Friday. So in our first collaborative group of this year, we had the opportunity to hear from each town, really what's been going on since our town meetings, what they're facing. Each town has a number of definites ahead of them right now, things that they're dealing with in terms of, financial limitation. There's also been some discussion about some indefinite items that are upcoming. For instance, Essex just completed their negotiations with town employees and also with the police, but Manchester has those things upcoming the next couple of years. There are some capital, of course, projects on both sides, and it was really just a chance to get the town's input on what they have coming up. And then after each town reported out on those things, Pam was able to offer, again, what we have on our plate and what's coming up. The members of the boards were also able to ask their questions. Of course, there was a question about what are we looking at for a correction, starting that conversation gently and really just understanding where we're at and where we need to go together as a collaborative group so that the work separately can continue. Pam, would you like to add anything to that?
I think we just reiterated, what we shared with them was we're starting this year where we ended last year, which is rounding off a $950,000 budget gap that we closed last year with a split between cuts and reserve use.
Mhm.
So that's going to be our starting point for this year with some anticipation that items that variables within our budget, like utilities, for instance, that escalated after the close of our budget will be carried forward into this year as new growth items before we even begin projecting into next year. And we're also getting some preliminary information from the state on cost of inflation impacts on out-of-district tuition costs, potentially being as high as 14% for next year. So if you take our entire out-of-district bill, which is upwards of $1 million, I think we're back of the enveloping a number somewhere between 250 and 4 for just a direct additional cost to the budget. So I think what we tried to say was we don't have details yet. We don't have real numbers yet, but common sense dictates that where we ended last year is where we begin with a few additional challenges already presented to us.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then the only other thing I would add from collaborative group is that the other piece happening outside of the group, but coming from our conversation there, Essex is finalizing their strategic plan for the first time, which is great.
Mhm.
And with that, we were able to have a group look at what that means for the goals as that pertain to the school district. And Ben Buttrick, the head of the finance committee in Essex, and I are going to be getting together to work through some of the language for the goal that really helps spell out the communication and the connection between the town boards and the district by way of school committee.
Mhm.
That really spells out that delineation so that we're setting people up not just now for success, but also future boards and future members for success. So that was our collaborative group meeting, first of the year. Anna, would you like to report out on yesterday's subcommittee meeting?
So one thing that came from the collaboration meeting was discussion about the original agreement, because I think at the time, folks were asking who should be what is the responsibility between the town finance committees versus the school committees when it comes to budget and enrollments, whatever data that might be. So it was discussed that the regional agreement might dictate that. So in the subcommittee meeting, we talked about the regional agreements because there are some things that we actually are not following. So I asked why,
All set.
So we talk about the some of the languages might be outdated and whatnot. So there was discussion about just some of the content. So I suspect that probably the next collaboration meeting, we'll probably talk about that again. And we went over the budget calendars and talk about when the collaborations meetings and also different town finance committee meetings might happen. And also when the public hearings will happen, how it all, put together in the budget calendar.
Which is going to be on the agenda for tonight too, so thank you. And just for a point of clarification, when we talk about the regional agreement, the conversation revolving around, it's not that we're not following the things, it's that the language in the agreement is is carried forth from 20 years. And so this agreement between the two towns, how it is implemented, has developed over time, and we respond according to their requests within that agreement. So I just want to clarify the
Yeah, the one
the
that
language
jumps
on
to
that.
mind is the example is the October, in the regional agreement, it states that October 1st will be the request for the annual report. And over time, since my time, the annual report request comes in January from the two towns. And there hasn't been any discussion over the years that that's going to change. And I'm sure we'll have a chat if it will. So we will comply with whatever time they request the report. We will make sure they have it.
Thank you. Policy Subcommittee, I believe we do have a report. Jake.
Sure. So we met for the first time yesterday. Erica, Pam, Avi, and myself. Basically, we took the long list of items that the school committee has been adding to the policy committee list and tried to get an understanding of what they are and tried to start some priorities. So we're probably going to start with finance-related edits to that whole finance section of the policy. MASCD just put out an update based on some regulation and changes in state language. So we'll take a look at that and based on input from Pam and Avi, be thinking about the reserve policy and what that might look like.
Is that it? Great. Thank you. Negotiations, Kate.
Negotiations are underway and ongoing. There's not much to share out at this point. We met last on the 28th, and we will be meeting again in a couple weeks.
Excellent. Thank you. Yep. Superintendent's report.
I just have three quick things tonight and then a couple of technical difficulties. So I'm going to work a little bit off my phone for notes, if you'll indulge me. So we have three, I just have three items. First, we have our first all district PD day coming up on this Friday. The focus will be on supporting our three curriculum and instructional related strategic initiatives, the authentic learning initiative, the social emotional initiative, and the diversity and inclusion initiative. It's going to be a workshop style day. Mike Liebman will be joining us for one component. We'll be doing three groups of three, rotating through in workshop format and trying to draw some connections from some of the theoretical discussions we've been having to how they start to play out in the classroom. So it's still working on developing our awareness, but now bringing it down to a level and where we're dealing with awareness on our day to day. We also have we have an iReady workshop. I know everyone loves reading about iReady. That's tucked under our authentic learning piece, but it's dealing with preparing everybody to implement our revised, our shift from RTI to the MTSS model. And it's just good technical knowledge because there's a piece of it, and I'm sure Sheila and John will speak to it in greater detail, that allows students, once we've done some evaluation, to have some individualized learning experiences based on where their skill areas for development are. And this is just a quick piece during the day to get teachers familiar with the platform and how it works. And for some reason, the third piece of the day is escaping me. Sheila, John, can you help me out? What was the third? Project Adventure, which is also tied to our authentic learning as well as our SEL and inclusion goals. And that's one that kind of pulls it all together. So we'll have a good report out on that after it's over. But we moved the day this year from January to October because it seems to be a way to come out front early with the learning and be able to apply it a little bit more throughout the year. So we'll report out on how that goes. The second is, again, it was on our district improvement list as something we were going to attempt to do. We were awarded the Safe and Supportive Schools grant from the state. It's somewhat competitive, but competitive in state and in support of SEL and inclusion work. So it's dollars available for the planning process to put together a more detailed plan of action of how we're going to implement on these issues. So that's about $10,000 of professional development money in support of our goals. And then third point is just a heads up that next week we're going to get our MCAS student family reports by the end of this week, and we'll turn those around and have them out to households sometime by the end of next week. And our assessment report, our student assessment report on that will be coming up on 11/15. And that'll be a district-wide look at what what student assessments are telling us about where we need to do some work with kids. That's all I've got tonight.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Pam about what she's presented? All right, thank you, Pam.
Yep.
Continued business. First up, we have our school improvement plans, Essex and Memorial. Are you presenting together or separately? All right, please come join us.
So as they're getting settled, just a reminder that this, you've heard the district overview, what, we've got the strategic plan, and you've got some handouts to go around. I went old school and did just a printout of what we're talking about tonight with middle and high school to follow. Once we solidify all of the master documents numbering so that they don't have to do 5 different versions of alignment. So we started this discussion with the district plan that's built off the strategic plan. And we went back and we've done some edits to that. And that's here again for discussion after Sheila and John are done tonight. But again, what we're looking at are multiple components of an overall plan designed to work over the next 10 years to achieve the strategic initiatives that are on this top document. So this is the 10-year goal plan. And each plan underneath district level is a 3-year goal plan, and the school plans are 2-year goal plans to make progress toward the ultimate achievement, which would be to create a school that represents what's on this front page. I thought it just might be easier to follow along. We've done a lot of different iterations of each plan, so I can't even guarantee you the one that I sent you in your review packet. It was the most recent one at the time. I'm going to encourage you, that's editing, and there will be a final editing before everything is posted, and everything in here will get converted into an online version that has clickable links between plans to the master overview and out to definitions of fun vocabulary that only educators would understand. What we're striving for tonight is to come to agreement on the content and direction of each of the plans and establishing that they in fact do support the strategic outlook. We could all wordsmith, we all have different ways of saying things or better ways of phrasing things that appeal to us. But I encourage you to go out and look at some other plans. We are very much aligned in our structure, in our approach to how other districts put their plans together. And I would argue that ours has a cohesiveness that some do not, if you just do a sampling of our neighbors. We'll try to present it as best we can. And there may be even another document which existed from the last strategic plan, which is like a 1-pager or a trifold brochure, which is your elevator pitch. It distills all of this road mapping down into something that we could actually share with the public in a quick conversation. This is very dense and very much designed to be our playbook that we, it is publicly available and we encourage everyone to look at it, but it really is here to guide our work. And odds are it's going to change between now and the end of the year when we come to report on it. Anything could happen. So it's fluid, it's living document. And what we're really looking at is to ensure that the direction and the content work is aligned. So that's kind of my pitch for the night, and I'm going to turn it over to John and Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you. So just by way of process, typically the way the plans are developed is we have a school improvement council at each school that works throughout the year, brainstorming, discussing, researching ways that they could improve or that they think that we could improve each individual school. And then in the past, what would happen, so this is my 12th presentation here in this district. In the past, I'd always make a comment at the end about how similar the plans were, even though they were done somewhat separately because they're tied together by the district improvement plan. This year's a little bit different though, so I'm really happy to have Sheila as my new partner in crime, so to speak, and we've worked together very closely on the plans. So we started with our school councils and then kind of came together. So you're going to see a lot of commonality between the two plans, between the initiatives at the two schools, and hopefully that'll continue to help bring the two schools together. I did just want to mention in back, so some of our school council members are back there. Tony Aloy, Lindsay Banks, Deb Patuto, and Samantha Seilig are here to represent the Memorial School Council. And Erica Spencer is a veteran or alumni, I should say, of our school council. So that's where it all began.
That's a word placement effort.
Little plug. So the first goal area that we looked at was authentic learning. So at the elementary level, it looks a little bit different maybe than at the middle high school, but some of the hallmarks are instruction and education that's student-centered, that's real world, so real world applications. And then we also talked a lot this fall about kind of balancing that with kind of the traditional educational approaches that we have in place as well. So for example, our math curriculum program or our English language arts curriculum program, they have some authentic learning pieces to them, but we'll need to bring in other things to kind of enhance that over the course of the next couple of years. One of the things that we've been talking about is, so obviously you've heard about at the high school, they do the NEASC review. So the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, there's also now an elementary component to that. So we're going to engage with that organization to do an evaluation to kind of tell us where we are and where we need to go in terms of authentic learning as one category in that evaluation.
And along the lines of authentic learning and trying to look a little closer at that. First of all, in educational speak, there's lots of different definitions for that. So we need to develop our own. What do we all mean by authentic learning? Make sure that there's a common definition. And then do a survey in our schools. Where do we see these things happening? And we know the importance of those. They're pretty research proven that making connections to things that happen during the day, real life activities are important, so we don't silo off that education. And our first steps will be that definition and then creating a survey that we look at our materials and look at where the authentic learning is happening within our schools.
And then Pam mentioned our transition from an RTI model, which is basically just math and literacy, to the MTSS model, which also brings in social emotional learning behavior, that side of things as well. One of the big pieces of that, also to bring the two schools together, is to use a common assessment tool, K through 8. So the middle school started with a program called iReady a couple of years ago, and the elementary schools have transitioned over to that this year. So we are in the process of just finishing up the first data collection for grades 1 through 5. The kindergarten data collection will come in a couple of weeks, just kind of give them some time to get settled. Actually, no, they may have actually started today. I know Chris Dwyer was in there working with them, so I'm assuming that's what was going on. And as Pam mentioned before, part of that program, there's a component where after we have all of the data, the program will suggest activities targeted to each student's strengths or weaknesses. So kids on the high achieving end of things can get some extensions, and kids that need extra remediation. There are some that are tech-based, but there are also actual lesson plans that, it's a very complex online system where you can kind of dial down and it'll say, okay, you've got 8 kids who need some work with this concept. Here are some lesson ideas that you can bring back to the classroom. So that kind of makes it a little more personal for each student in the areas of reading and math. And then we're also going to be looking at a social emotional learning assessment tool to go along with that.
And in keeping with our kind of continuous improvement efforts, with the district curriculum cycle, review cycle, we're taking a closer look this year at science and history and social science. There are areas that we need to do, again, evaluate where the gaps are between the frameworks and our materials and our practices. So that will happen. A lot of that work happens in the curriculum leadership team efforts, and then down into our schools and into our staffs to take a closer look at what we're doing. Is it aligned? What do we need to make that alignment happen? So we'll be doing a review of both of those disciplines this year.
So then when we look at the iReady data, and obviously it informs our classroom teachers, our special ed teachers, in terms of their, actually also our literacy and math specialists, in terms of their instruction. That data also and information is also valuable to parents as well, so they can get kind of a snapshot of how my student is doing, how my child is doing, I should say, and what areas do they need to grow in, what areas are they strong in. So we want to talk between the two schools at the staff level to come up with some sort of an evidence-based family conference setup. So right now, the way, so we changed the name from parent-teacher conferences to family conferences this year, just so that that's not confusing. But right now, basically what happens is the conferences are happening before there really is data to go over in terms of like report cards, if you look at data in that way. So now that we have this other set of data, is there a way that we could have our family conferences be centered on the data? So here's where your students performing in these areas, and here's what we're going to do to help them or extend their learning, and here's what you can do at home. So have that be a little bit more focused on the student achievement side of things. The other thing that's kind of unique to Memorial, when we were going through the building process, so this is kind of a fun one. There was a vintage baby grand piano in the auditorium that the auditorium was kind of built around. So when they did the renovations, they put this baby grand piano down near the stage and they put in all of the seating. And it just seemed like a shame to let that get demolished with the building. So the moving company, I don't know how they did it. They wrapped it all up in plastic and whatever else they did. And they got it out of the school for, it was about 9 months or so. It was in storage. And then they transferred it back into the hub, so our lobby. The Manchester Friends for Performing Arts and our staff kind of came together, did a little bit of a refurbishing job. So it's been tuned, it's been fixed. It plays as best as it can for its age. It sounds beautiful. We have an online sign up genius where students who play the piano or are learning to play the piano can sign up, and they get a little piano player's driver's license, and they come in the morning and play the piano as the kids are coming in. It's the most amazing thing I think I've ever experienced in my career. You know, you walk in on a Monday morning and you open the door and you just hear like this beautiful music, and some of our students are incredibly talented. It kind of sprung off from there. We've had students who would say, like, could we come in and play the violin instead? Or could we do, a duet singing? And like, absolutely. So this year, it's been a little bit slower to get off the ground. So we've had to kind of, do a little bit of PR to get people to sign up. But it's been a little more, Samantha, it's been a little more prevalent this week, right? Yeah. So I think after this week, it's actually pretty packed. So it's neat that you'll see the kids coming in the morning and they'll just stop and sit down and watch on their way in. So that's just
Do
something
they sit on the hub?
they do actually. They do. In fact, the morning gym kids asked if they could come in instead of being in the gym playing, if they could come in and listen to the music. So a lot of them will kind of come over and sit and listen on the hub. Yeah, on the platform.
On the platform.
Yep.
So one of the things you're going to hear that straddles many of these initiatives is really about partnerships. And it's about family partnerships and making sure families are aware how their children are doing and what role they can play, but also the partnerships that make authentic learning kind of come into the schools and the schools come out to those. So you'll also see that we've got some concerted efforts to expand those partnerships for opportunities for kids and to try to make sure that we're fostering as many of those as we can in our communities. Our communities have a lot to offer, and it would be a shame if our student can't take advantage of those partnerships. So you're going to see that in a couple of spots, but it certainly exists under those authentic learning experiences. Any comments?
Yeah.
So social emotional learning is your second strategic initiative, and SEL has kind of been the wheelhouse of elementary schools for an awful long time. It's the first place that children really come into a social organization in this country, and we tend to know that building skills around empathy and around collaboration and a sense of belonging, building a sense of belonging for each student, and all of those kind of elements that help students achieve social wellness within the context of each other and their peers has always been kind of foremost at the elementary. The change that's happened is that the research has followed that supports that students that come with those skills actually are are ready and prepared for the rigors that kind of happen when things get tough. So the resiliency is there for them. So if you think of it like a journey, the journey is a hike, and we're preparing them for the right equipment and the right strategies for when they start to scale and things get a little tough, then they're able to then continue on that hike to get to the top. So the research has now kind of supported that. So within that kind of context, there is a initiative going on, of course, for social emotional learning, and you'll see it in many little components of our plan as well as everyone else's. But
Yeah, so one of the big projects that we undertook really last spring, conversation started in the fall around the fact that each elementary school, Sheila mentioned silos, were very much silos in terms of their schedule. So if you looked at fourth grade at Memorial and fourth grade at Essex, the schedules were very, very different. So Angela Bick, our curriculum director, undertook the task of trying to put together a common schedule between the two buildings, so that if your child goes to either school and is in third grade, they have the same, at least scheduled experience as a starting point. One of the things that we discussed during that time was the younger grades had an additional movement break time or recess. Typically, or yeah, I guess traditionally it was kind of mid-morning, and the upper grades did not. So the first thing we did was we added that into all grades. So K through 5, they all have that extra block. And instead of calling it recess, which sounded a little traditional, we called it the SEL block. So it could be a movement break, or it could be a time for teachers to deliver some of the activities and lessons under the social emotional learning umbrella. So some of the ruler lessons, the second step lessons, which is our anti-bullying program, or, oh my gosh, I'm trying, actually, or responsive classroom, thank you. So those are kind of the three program areas that teachers can take activities and lessons from, but it also can just be a time to go outside and run around and get off, blow off some steam or do an activity outside in the nice weather. And so we kind of left that up to the teachers in terms of, kind of take the temperature of your room and, what do they need at this moment? Have you had a lot of conflict happening out at recess and you need to have a family meeting, so to speak? Or is it a time where the kids just need to go outside and play? I was saying to Pam today, one of the nice aspects of the new building is my new office window overlooks the playground. And I don't think I've looked out there at all this year.
Just as a reminder, if you're calling in, please mute your phone. Unless Pam can record.
Yeah, so I don't think there's been one time that I've looked out my window that playground has not been full of children. So it's been great to see.
so of course, there's curriculum that's provided for staff under the ruler program and under responsive classroom and also second step. But it's really about common language and sharing those strategies amongst each other, among the staff, and really being responsive to the students and what they might need in front of you. So we have goals that are associated with building capacity there, both in training and within, where we're sharing those activities with one another. This summer, there was a group, a curriculum group that was really looking at those kind of very deliberate instructional lessons that they could offer those and make those available within the context of the learning community, that there could be some common lessons that we made sure all students were exposed to.
Yeah, and one of the pieces that's kind of emerged, I guess, in a way, in a grassroots way, is kind of this teacher leadership that's been emerging around SEL. So one of the nice things was, we had that group that worked this summer. It was teachers from both elementary schools that worked together on kind of looking at that scope and sequence for the year. We also had a teacher at Memorial who volunteered to get trained in responsive classroom at a very high level. So she's not at the trainer level yet, where she could go to other school districts and train staff, but she has been training our staff on responsive classroom just to kind of get that back up and running. Also, there's a team of teachers that the team that worked in the summertime, but there's also another team of teachers that took a course this summer around mindfulness. So it's a lot of kind of yoga type things that can happen in the classroom. And so we've kind of embedded that PD into our staff meetings, where at the beginning of each staff meeting, they'll share a different strategy, either from Responsive Classroom or from some of these other resources that we have. So that's been a nice thing that's emerged in terms of leadership.
And as I said, partnership is one of those things you're going to keep hearing. And of course, we're inviting families to be part of the conversation. That common language is what matters. And so we have goals associated with making sure that you understand kind of the activities that are going on, and you have an opportunity to participate within the context of that conversation.
Great. So, yep.
Ready? Yeah. And so realistically, in keeping with social emotional learning, you can't get that far away from that without talking about diversity and inclusion, because that's that sense of belonging we're talking about that we teach kids very early, and every student deserves that, and every family and every person in our community deserves that sense of belonging. And the initiatives that you have from a district perspective also kind of circle back to the success in the future. We're not going to live in a world where you can't function culturally without some cultural competence, and all of that starts early and easier when it's young. So there are definitely some goals associated with that we have kind of baked into our school improvement plans. One of which is really about auditing ourselves and our language and our curriculum materials to make sure that they are current. We get very outdated very quickly in schools with our materials, and sometimes it's just off. And so there's some effort to take a look at that and to make sure that we're presenting diverse characters and diverse cultures within the context of our teaching materials.
And then there's a program that we have in the district that we're looking to bring back and potentially expand into other areas. So it's called Understanding Our Differences. And we did this up until the pandemic in grades 3, 4, and 5. So each grade level has a different disability category. So there's ADHD, learning disability, autism, physical disabilities, and learning disabilities. And each grade kind of takes one of those, and they immerse themselves into what it's like to be a person, a student, an adult with that disability. We have guest speakers come in. Often they are middle high school students who come over. So maybe middle high school students who have a learning disability who can come over to our schools and literally say, I was in your desk and I have a learning disability, and this is how, why it was hard, and this is how it made me stronger. We have a gentleman who's a graduate of Memorial School who comes in, or has come in the past, to talk about physical disabilities. So he was paralyzed in a skiing accident years ago. And it's one of the most impactful things that we do with the kids. The number of times that we've had a kid stand up and say, "Oh my God, I can so relate to you." It's been amazing. So we'd like to expand that and potentially maybe look into other areas other than just disabilities, but maybe there are a lot of differences in our buildings and our communities, and can it be something that we maybe expand to other categories? So that's something that we're going to definitely bring back. And then at Memorial, our theme this year, I'm sure you've heard a bit about it, is It Starts With Me. So it was a book that was written by Martin Luther King's daughter. And it's a very simple book that talks about that the world needs love, and we all need to spread love in the world in order for the world to have love. And it has to start with me. I can't wait for somebody else to do it. It's got to start with me. We read that book to the student body, and it was amazing the things that they picked up on it, or in it rather. The title, It Starts With Me, the M-E for me happens to both be capitalized. I'm still not really sure why, but I was like, oh, Manchester Essex, perfect. And one of the second graders, maybe it was, raised his hand and he said, oh, I noticed that the character in the story is a Black girl, just like Martin Luther King was a Black man. And that's kind of throughout the book. There's a lot in the pictures that the kids can learn from, and just the story itself is really heartwarming. So we're hoping that that's a little spark that will kind of catch fire in the classrooms, and then hopefully maybe in the district and the town, beyond our four walls. So that's been a fun initiative at Memorial. then the last one's budget. And that's always one that's
What are you
hard for us at the school level to write goals for. But, we do want to look at, our staffing and our leadership models and take a look and see where we may have some gaps, especially with some of these new initiatives. We've talked about social emotional learning and maybe having a little bit of a new leadership model around there, where we can have some people that are kind of like the go-to people for that topic. But obviously, we always try to be as efficient as we can be with our staffing, which sometimes causes us to have to make difficult decisions that sometimes impact class size and that sort of thing. But as the funnel gets narrower, it's tougher. But I think we're in good shape for now.
And I'll just add, it's just our job to advocate for what we feel like a staff need, to give the experience that I think it deserves. So there's that side of that. So, sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate hearing that. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so as a reminder, by way of process for us, we've now had our presentation. We have the opportunity to ask any clarifying questions based on the content, remembering our charge. Also, for the public viewing here and online, we, of course, have received these materials in advance and had a chance to ask questions, also either directly being answered or passed on to the presenters to include. So I would expect that much of that has been done also. So do we have any clarifying questions for John and Sheila based on the content? Yes.
With respect to the social emotional learning block that's been implemented, and I think you said for grades 3 through 5, I know for K through 2, it's at the time when recess used to meet. For grades 3 through 5, what did it take the place of?
It's a good question. So there were a lot of things that were happening in reality, but not necessarily on paper. So I think it was just that we kind of carved that time out on paper. So it probably would be just 5 minutes from here, 5 minutes from there, from the other academic areas. But we didn't take anything out entirely. We did, obviously we don't have foreign language this year. So that was probably a piece of it when Sheila did the schedule. I mean, sorry, Sheila, Angela.
Done a schedule that looked very similar, actually.
Any other
I have
clarifying
a
questions?
follow-up question to Erica's. So when Allison and Angela were here introducing MTSS a million years ago / in May, they had told us that there was going to be an SEL block now, that SEL was going to be this gen ed and that it was at the end of the day and it was a half-hour block. Is that not in practice what is happening?
It's not always at the end of the day, it's throughout the day.
Yeah.
It happens for different grade levels at different spots.
Okay.
And so that's where there's some flexibility, because there's some movement breaks and there's this SEL block, this kind of 20-minute, actually, I don't think it's a 30-minute block. So, what I will just say what classically happens, and we're fortunate at the elementary level, is that you can't get every framework concept taught. It wouldn't matter if you went into August. And so elementary staff are very good at blending and incorporating and kind of working things in. So if something happens at the recess yard, it could be part of the SEL conversation. If there's a book that they're reading for English language arts and it's got a character who has a dilemma, it could be part of the conversation. So I think there's so much fluidity that they are allowed to use within that context. And then there are some movement blocks. So I think that that it's not 30 minutes, it's also some movement blocks and the SEL piece.
And then can I just dig into the SEL stuff now?
These are your questions. Yes, your clarifying questions, please.
So we used to have screeners that were being completed to identify students who were at risk or needed maybe some additional SEL support. Are we still using a screener, and how are students who need maybe that another tier of support being provided with that?
So that's one of the things that was different in the silos. So that happened at Essex Elementary, not at Memorial. So that's one of the pieces that we're going to undertake as we transition to MTSS, is determine, what assessment tool is that we use at both schools and how does it get implemented? And then how are those groups or services, how are they formed? We did have a pretty significant change in our counseling and school psychologist model this year, which has, really kind of tightened things up there. So we might have to look in terms of the budget process and staffing and that sort of thing, that a little different.
But we also have the data from the kids almost in every class do the mood meter at some portion of their day. And so we have this tracking data, kind of how kids are feeling, which is just one other, piece of the wardrobe in the closet about how is a student doing and where is their feelings, where are they at with all of that. So it's not to say we don't have any, we have some pieces in there, but to formalize that's part of the collaboration that we're trying to get to.
And then in terms of our SEL programs, so I'm hearing that we're doing ruler, I'm hearing we're also implementing second step, right?
Yeah, just the anti-bullying component.
Okay,
Yeah,
just the, okay.
module. Yep.
And it's available for people. So if they feel like
Right.
there is something else in it, it's a resource.
Mhm. And then I know that we've always been using responsive classroom in theory.
There.
Well, I mean, it's
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
it's just,
That's right.
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier than others to practice.
Yeah.
How are staff being supported in implementing that's a lot. So that's a lot of programs, and even just Sheila, what you were saying about common language, right? To have the common language from 3 different programs is a lot to track. Are staff getting PD in all of those, or are they just more kind of picking and choosing which ones they're most familiar with to implement in their classrooms?
Yeah, so one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years in education and probably forever is there are all these new little initiatives that we say to the teachers, oh, just kind of sneak this in, just sneak this in. So these are all things that they've been doing already. There just hasn't been like time dedicated for it. So it's been kind of okay, how do I sneak this in? I always felt a little anxious about it because what if they, you come to the end of the year, they didn't have time to do, whatever lessons that they weren't able to get to. So we were always, very much on top of the anti-bullying lessons in second step, and we had kind of a schedule of make sure you get them done by these certain dates. But the other pieces, the ruler, the ruler lessons are actually new. So ruler as a program is something we've been doing for a few years, but they now have actual lessons. So this group that met this summer, they have been working on a scope and sequence and rolling that out at staff meetings to the teachers so that they can kind of understand how those lessons work. And then this, the responsive classroom, it's funny that you said in theory, because we started doing responsive classroom before I was here. And I've hired a good number of the classroom teachers in that time, and we've never had a training for them. So that's why we had the teacher go out and get trained at that high level so that she could provide that training. Of course, she's on maternity leave right now, so we had to adjust our schedule a little bit, but she did do a little bit before she left, so.
And if I could, very much like we do for students, there's a range here. So their lessons are tighter and here you go. And here's a lesson you can use when you feel the need. Responsive classrooms is about routines. And so that's a little bit more kind of embedded within the context of those. And then, of course, the second step is a nice resource that you can pull from. So we've tried to give, again, this diversified range of materials, but we really want it to come based on what the students in front of them need in that time or in that conversation. It's also why we have goals in there about them sharing in almost every faculty meeting is some kind of sharing of what they're doing so that everybody kind of gets to this common sense of learning.
Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? You've already taken a turn. I'll come back to you. Jake? She's in on it. We're good.
So I appreciate that the authentic learning efforts are at its starting point, right? You got to define it and kind of come to some common sense on that. At the same time, you are going to start looking at science and social studies, which have a lot of potential related to authentic learning, SEL and DEI.
Yeah.
I love that idea of the curriculum journaling that both schools are going to undertake. And I appreciate that it's aligned to state standards, but if it could also look at those 3 aspects as you go through that process. I think that could be a way to kind of, when it comes to making that decision about the curriculum, to better understand how that does. So
Through those lenses.
through the
You mean
lens,
to-
yeah.
What is the question, though? So frame that in the form of a question, please, because we're in clarifying questions currently.
Will you be looking at the three aspects?
Please, yes.
Well, that actually was a suggestion from our school council, was to be more specific about that. And I said I was going to do it verbally, but I did not. So yes, we will.
It's under DEI, see it though.
So, so the second thing has to do with kind of the balance of how you're collecting data on ELA and math, putting in the iReady, and then talk about the family conferences, focusing on data.
Mhm.
Family conferences ideally are talking about all the subjects. How are you going to ensure that there's enough data and insight beyond just ELA and mathematics or literacy and mathematics? Both for, all the supports that the iReady process is supposed to provide to kids and for those kind of family conference conversations.
Yeah, that's our task. Is to try to figure that out so that we can come up with some sort of a procedure or protocol where the teachers can sit down, they have information in all subjects. Right now, we don't have that type of assessment in those areas, but we may.
I think it comes from a need base. That goal comes from a need base where maybe those conferences look different depending on who you're sitting with. So we'd like to make it a little more uniform. And we have to start someplace, and that's ready data, not iReady data. Yes, iReady data, but also ready data, that we feel like it will be an easy launching pad to start training around that kind of conversation.
I think we can't overlook the fact that we have a standards-based report card, and that's the basis of any future data-based conversation with families, and the tip of what has been my experience and practice to ground conversation. So you can, assuming we will have a common curriculum as we do now in those other subject areas like social studies and science, we'll also have common assessments, which are going to inform the standards assessment for each child, forming the basis of the family conference. So I
Yeah,
think we do have, even though we've been discussing iReady and its importance. And again, just for a quick context blast, we were severely concerned about our literacy data, posting 50% of students in deficit at schools, which is why we've been focusing on increasing capacity in tier 1 instruction. MTSS is a shift back to tier 1 instruction and tier 1 responsibilities. So there is a little bit of history behind why that is so prevalent in our conversations, because there are areas that we're identifying most deficit. Even if you look at our past MCAS, science has been producing higher than both math and literacy at the elementary levels for a couple of years now. So we are focusing on correcting a concern. I think we're well on our way, but I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that we aren't collecting data and assessment in all the other subject areas, and we report on that 3 times a year.
To be brutally honest, as much as we love, and there's great opportunity in history and social science and fun for kids and excitement for kids. If we don't get the foundational stuff of reading and math locked in, then it follows all the way through. So that is an unspoken charge in elementary schools.
Do you have any other clarifying questions?
I just want to ask briefly, Sheila, you mentioned quite a bit about parent engagement and partnerships. I felt I didn't see that as much. I saw, for example, parents involved in the charter development, but things like, parents being engaged in SEL was kind of limited to being sent a newsletter. So could you speak just a little bit more about what that kind of active engagement might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it from my side. I feel like, first of all, they need to know what they're doing, right? And parents are busy enough. I don't know that they want directive from us, but I think we want to welcome them to the table to support this work in whatever way we can. So certainly through councils, I think we'll have conversations, and through the friends groups about, are there ways that we can offer this up? I know John talked about, he and I talked about with the friends groups, trying to get those charters kind of established also through them. So I guess that's open for lots of opportunity, but I think we wanted to be clear that we really encourage and would like to see that kind of engagement in whatever way that we can.
No.
Thank you. And thank you for phrasing the form of a question. Erica, did you have a second
Jeopardy segment.
clarifying question?
I was just hoping you could say a couple words about the educators' reaction to the transition from having a beginning of the day recess for K through 2 to sometimes needing to use the recess as an SEL block. I imagine there's pros and cons to that depending on the day, and I appreciate that you said that there's flexibility.
Yep.
But I've heard some feedback that it can be hard not to have that recess, and I just wondered how you're experiencing it.
Yeah, I think when the schedule came out on paper, that was the initial, like, wait a minute, we always had our recess at 10 o'clock in the morning. I think one of the things I asked people to do was to kind of live it for a little bit and see how it feels, because it was very strategic where those blocks were put, right? So if you had an early lunch, you had a big stretch of time in the afternoon, it was put in the middle of the afternoon as opposed to the middle of the morning. So we definitely do need to, you know, later on this year, after the new year, evaluate the schedule in real time and say, okay, so it seemed like it was going to work well on paper. What were the pros and cons? It seems like, I mean, we have a couple teachers here who could speak to it. It seems like it's working well, but
Like, I had to get a refresher from you today. Like,
Yeah.
What is there's the morning there's the early morning recess, then there's a floating recess, there's a lunch recess.
yeah,
So there are it seems to be quite a few different opportunities for getting out during the day.
yeah, so the gates, so to speak, open at 8:05. So if kids get there at 8:05, and actually with the new playground, they're there like 6 a.m. I'm not sure. They don't have any tardies this year, literally, like hardly any tardies, because they all come early to play in the playground. So they've got some time there before they go into the classroom. So that's kind of like a before school recess. Then they have their kind of fixed lunch recess time that's, you know, attached to lunch. And then they have this other SEL block that, depending on the grade, it's at a different time during the day. And then they have phys ed twice a week. Decent amount of movement time. We did want to try to add some more to the upper grades. So yeah, I think it would, you know, if we could extend the day even further and have the SEL block and you know, a strict, you know, additional movement time, I think that would be great. This was like a small little win, I thought. So yeah, I think people are getting used to it. And, you know, I'm not sure if it stays that way in the future or if we look at it in a different way. Yeah, yeah. And I think they have to, the other thing too is, we're gonna talk about this at the staff meeting, you know, they have to feel comfortable as professionals to make the decision and say, I'm gonna do, you know, a 5-minute SEL activity, and then we're gonna go outside and play, or we're gonna go outside and do the activity, and I'm gonna give them some time to play, as opposed to it being like a class, so to speak. So.
Anyone else have a clarifying question? Yes.
Pam's comment about literacy got me thinking, are we using iReady as our early literacy screener? And is it our only early literacy screener, or are we doing other layers?
So yeah, there are other layers. So there are some individual one-on-one assessments that the literacy specialists are doing with kids as well.
Are those the iReady one-on-one, like the quick?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So they felt that the tools that were in there were as good or better than what we were using in the past, the one-on-one assessments.
Yeah.
So yeah, the 4 literacy specialists from the 2 schools got together and decided, you know, a group of assessments that they would do common.
And then there's some deeper ones if they have a concern. about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, my clarifying question is the Understanding Our Differences program, which I always in the past just thought was incredible. Such a smart thing. The 4th and 5th graders who have kind of missed the last couple of years of that, is there any possibility or consideration currently being given to merging some of that content so they might have access, recognizing there are limitations?
We're also doing it at the middle school too, at one point. So we can revisit that with Allison was the original.
You might not be that far in the planning, so that's my
There
question.
may be a way to
Yes,
go
Yeah,
back to
good
and
idea.
catch up.
Yeah.
Some of the kids who are in
Yeah.
sixth grade now, are building in the middle school component.
Thank you. Thank you for answering all of our questions succinctly and efficiently and effectively. And thanks for the great questions. That was thoughtful and appropriate. So,
You should thank you for coordinating.
Yeah.
and all those work together.
My computer, what?
Suppressing.
So yours.
That's computer battery's getting dangerously low.
Minus?
Oh, no, mine is.
so it's Maria.
Hi.
That's even worse.
Almost. Right.
I guess. We'll find.
Didn't see that.
I don't have Avi, my portable charger tonight.
I do need a charger.
Breathe and grab a piece of candy
No.
as we,
Well, thank you
It's
all.
plenty of-
Thanks for all you.
thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to deliberate, so don't go.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
I don't have one and Avi's not here because he always brings mine.
Oh.
That's the owl.
Another operations guy now.
Can you?
Pick up
I
on
don't
that.
have this.
Yeah. So let us continue as they're working out their technical concerns. Thank you for the noting that. So recognizing our charge again from Pam, we have a motion, we have a second, we've had, oh no, we don't. We've had our clarifying question.
Motion to approve the school improvement plans for Essex Elementary and Memorial.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. This is where we take our chance for discussion. So if you'd like to say a thing, we can go through 2 rounds of this. Absolutely. And then we'll take our vote. Yes, Jake,
Point of
please.
clarification.
Yeah.
Which version are we adopting? Is it what we got and what we were just handed are not the same?
What we received in the packet.
What's different about this?
This is the updated.
The printed one?
Content changes.
Yeah.
I think this is the same.
That's
The
the.
format. SO being changed. Different. I'm not sure that they were aligned.
So there's some edits to the EES one that align, that may not have been there that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Do you have discussion? Does anyone have anything they'd like to share for discussion before our vote? Surely someone has something to say. Please, go ahead.
I guess the only thing, and this is just a discussion, it's not going to change my vote, but I get nervous about recess being shrunk in any way. And I appreciate the goals of the SEL, what do we call it? I appreciate the social emotional learning goals, but I think, and I can tell that they are both thinking as well about the fact that recess in its natural state is a social emotional experience, and how much we take away from that to add a more structured type of content. I just think that
Hello? I think the in-person people went away.
Oh, we're back.
Oh,
Can you hear us now?
Okay. Great. Now I hear you.
super.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're back.
We're good.
Perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
I was.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share anything before I vote? Dick, please.
So, yeah, I'll just say, so I think I owe you all a little bit of an apology because last meeting, with, Trish and Joanne, I really push to try to emphasize this as a communication document as well as a planning document. I appreciate Pam's clarification earlier and not to view this as a communication document. That said, I think at some point we need to figure out how to communicate all the excellent context and sense of what's going to be accomplished via this plan that all the principals have given us. Because we owe it to the public, and particularly in a unique year like this, where we have a new strategic plan, a new district plan, and new school plans, that we need to communicate that context and goals at some point. I appreciate this is not it. So, but at some point we need to think about that, and relatively soon.
Thank you. Any other discussion about how, as this pertains to our vote?
To the communication. It is maybe a misunderstood. Wasn't there like a, you mentioned that we hired, or we will hire like a firm
Yeah,
consultant to do that?
yeah, we signed up with John Guilfoyle to do some basic communications. Now, my understanding is it's going to be press releases and some promotional video. I don't know if they're graphic designers, and I don't know if that's an additional cost. So we went with a pretty base package to help just get more things out. In all honesty, the incident at the beginning of the year and the crisis communication is kind of what put it over the top, which is they're already partnered with both Essex and Manchester, so they were able to help us craft some things very quickly while we were attending to other things, and it seemed the time to make the commitment. So I do think they'll be able to assist us in some press releases and things like that to start to get the word out. I think we also have some capacity in when we had gone out with this, when it was back when I was working with Anne, when she was on school committee, and we were doing our really first version of this. We can certainly put a much nicer, easier access version on the web so people can click in and out of things. It'll just take us a little bit of time. I would think between those two things, we should be able to start to communicate around them, and even just shift some of our language and reporting here to make sure that when we're talking about updates and things, that they tie to any of the work that we highlighted. So I think there's plenty of opportunity.
Any other discussion, just in the interest of recognizing we have a couple committee members who are going to have hard stops, and also in fairness to John and Sheila as well. Any other discussion about the bring up and discuss the school committee comment, because I think that is important to do as well.
I just think it's really exciting, and I'm very happy to see the schools coming together across the towns. That's a little bit new for all of us, and that's great.
And that's my discussion as well. I love the language. I can't get that much of myself.
Good.
Sorry, I'm sure.
Has the video started? I can't tell.
Yeah, it's Halloween green. Yeah, I also am very excited about these plans, and especially the collaboration, the cross-district collaboration, recognizing that there are things that that can be done together, and there are also ways that each, I think that these plans are aligned with the strategic vision, knowing again, like I said, that there are things they can do together, but recognizing that they are separate schools and allowing that to shine also in appropriate ways. And so, in my opinion, this is positive and meets certainly the criteria of what we're looking for my vote in terms of our charge. Anyone else have comment to make before we take our vote or discussion, excuse me? Okay, hearing none. The motion on the table is to approve the plans. All in favor? That is unanimous. The motion carries. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, John. Much appreciation. Thank you, school councils and school council members, for all of your work putting this forth, and for everyone.
And I just love to piggyback and say, I am really appreciate, it has been a many years journey to try to get us to the point we are now with trying to be on the same page. And it's really rewarding, and I'm really thankful to Sheila and John and the staff at both schools. It hasn't been easy for them, and they've been asked to do a lot. in support of reaching this goal, and we are going to continue to work to try to fine tune it so it's a better experience for them. But we have come a long way, and I'm excited with what we can do in the next steps. I really am. So thank you guys very much.
Okay, done. Thank you. On to the district improvement plan, which, as you'll recall, we started with our understanding and are going through that in our September 6th meeting. And I think that now that I think it was what wisdom and Pam, now that we've been through the middle school, high school improvement plan approval process, the elementary school plan approval process, we have a little bit more context and understanding for how the pieces all fit together. We may be a little bit more prepared to engage in this conversation as well. So Pam, would you like to present at this point?
Yep, I'm going to pull it up. Just the thought of the strategic, just the thought of the district plan has everyone reaching for chocolate.
Sugar.
This doesn't want to cooperate with me right now. Okay, I sent you a crossover list of the few things that we've changed in the document. We can go piece by piece through that if you want. We can just take questions. So I would say the walk away last time was, I do think it's been helpful to see how it all starts to fit together. It is clear that we need to do some more editing just to make sure we're using the same labeling on each of the documents, and that the words are somewhat similar, and we've been able to do that. And there will be a little bit more done before it's finalized. I did start to put on some layers for more public consumption so that there's a little bit more of a guide for people as to what they're looking at. I also anticipate when we finally go up on the web, there'll be a small summary of the community, small summary of the schools, the 4 schools, their populations and things of that nature, to just give some context to the plan. In a brief kind of, this is what we've done over the past few years, and these are the contributing documents that guided our work in formulation. The additions here are simply some combining of a couple of the district objectives into one, and shifting some language that was listed as an objective to a deliverable because it seemed like it could play either way, and clarifying where these things were in direct support of the student achievement. I would say the whole document, if you read the strategic overview, all of what we're doing is in pursuit of supporting students in achieving at greater heights by finding inroads to broaden the number of students we're reaching with our pedagogy, right? So the whole document is really looking for expanding pedagogy as a means of expanding reach, as a means of improving student achievement. And it's a given that student achievement is our ultimate goal. So if that helps to clarify any of kind of how we're going at things, hopefully it's a little bit more clear in some of the narrative that was provided. Other than that, there is no content change. There has been some language updates. If you want me to go point by point, just let me know. If you feel like you were able to digest it from the crossover list that I gave you, we can just discuss it and answer questions.
I would be in favor of that,
Mhm.
rather than going point by point. Are we generally in consensus about that? Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. So recognizing, again, that we've come kind of far in the last couple of meetings, I know Jake had some concern, or especially people who had voted no, last time. Are your concerns resolved? Do you have further clarifying questions? That's where we're at right now. So we haven't had a motion. We're at clarifying questions for Pam that would impact your vote to now approve the district improvement plan where we are. Please.
So in the BI section, when we talk about how to evolve out of the features, what are the changes over the
I think the changes are found at the school level plans. So we just heard
Okay.
the elementary
But not-
schools talk about wonders, understanding our differences, and some of the different initiatives, the cultural initiatives they're gonna undertake. So I would say that the closer we get to the kids, so when we leave the district and go to the school level, is where we're seeing the different inroads and direct impacts to students.
I wonder, which was great when they were presenting it, I wonder if we should include some of that language here to represent that it is done.
We do make reference to the one piece of the district that we would probably take on. We have ADL, the Anti-Defamation League World of Difference program is in full force at the high school. We've started to integrate it into the middle school. It's more fledgling, and there's been an ongoing conversation to bring it to the K-5 level. We've made reference to that in here. I don't think we need to name specific kid actions in this particular plan. If in future years, we want to add an entire column that kind of plays off if we do these things, we anticipate the impacts to students would be, we could. I wouldn't recommend it at every objective level. I think we try to cover that in the theory of action on the guiding document, right? Because what we're doing here is lining up things that we are going to do with our staff to prepare them to implement and make decisions in the classroom that help to improve students' experience. So I do think we have it covered at the multiple levels.
Thank you. Anyone else, particularly those who voted against supporting the DIP at our last meeting? Do you have other, please?
So I'll just say, I appreciate the narrative. It accomplishes some of that kind of context
Okay.
and a little bit of what you're saying, we will achieve kind of thing, but mostly context
Mostly
that,
context.
that gives other readers of this a sense of why these things make sense. So I appreciate that. And again, holding aside, this is a communication document, which I still want it to be, but I understand it's not. And that this is a planning document, I think, and maybe Anna, this is what you just asked, but I think, with another common theme of our last discussion was, to what extent can we make this a little more student active? And I think what I hear you saying, and just please correct me if I'm wrong, that's in the school plans. Does it also imply that you went through each of these and kind of looked for where that might happen and it just didn't make sense to
I
add in
think
here?
we have in all of the plans, the direct impacts we can see right now for students. And remember, the school improvement plans are going to flip a little faster. So I would say as we get off our foundational work and into implementation and start to see more of those types of objectives, you're going to see more direct impacts to students. But right now, this is by design focused on building capacity for pedagogy change. Especially at the district level. I think the district level plays the role in harnessing all of the independent activities. It's making sure that every school is working in a differentiated way at its readiness level and rowing in the same direction. So ours is by design heavier on structure systems for the adults, with the schools focusing more on how at that level it developmentally plays out for the kids that they're working with. We're kind of that center it's kind of the bureaucracy piece. There's a lot of, that's where a lot of the compliance comes from, or ensuring that we are complying to the extent that we have to, while still, we're just like one of the schools, when you look up to DESE, it's like, we want to do our thing, and we know there are certain things that we need to attend to. So it tends to try to strike that balance. If you would look back to our 11-12, like kind of our original district improvement plan, it was you would have seen it's very heavy on special education. Because at that time, we weren't yet a district that practiced inclusion in the sense of integrating students into the general ed classroom and providing instruction so that so that students with IEPs could access the curriculum. So our entire original plan was heavily focused on building capacity, language, and programming to support inclusion. So we sometimes trail behind some other districts in terms of what our initiatives are. But then as we came through the years and we built from the foundation forward, it started to become a little bit more, it had more of an everyday feel, like what you might be seeing in your schools on an everyday basis. Remember, we're going to come back with the district plan in June and do a progress report. So at that point, we'll be able to say, this is moving faster, this is moving slower. This was a good idea when we were thinking about it, but this isn't really, we've been working with iReady for the whole year, and this isn't gonna work. So we will do an annual review and update of what's working, what's not, and where we think the heavy focus will be for the following year. That was a long answer, sorry.
We may have answered all the clarifying questions probably. Does anyone else have clarifying questions for Pam? Right, then is there a motion? Would anyone like to make a motion? We all have to make the motions. So like everything we do, we have to do by a motion.
I will move to accept it.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further discussion?
Tam, I think that your points, bringing us back to the theory of action and putting that on the first page was really helpful. To sort of make that connection between how this impacts students directly.
You're welcome. Maybe we can work it into the little introduction too, as a reference point in case somebody just jumps in.
My point of discussion is I was in favor of approving it last time as well, but I also see the value of having taken this a step further, especially for the time for us as a committee to have continued conversation, to come to understanding together. It served actually multiple purposes, not just to improve the plan, but also to improve us understanding what are we thinking and how are we presenting things so that we can all understand them. So I personally don't see anything in the way of alignment, policy, egregious error, or otherwise that would impact my vote to approve this plan. So that is my input. Anyone else have discussion?
I just agree with you and say it has gotten better with each iteration. And it has forced us, in me in particular, we are so deep in, I said this to Jake the other day, we're so deep in it that sometimes we're launching into a thought midway in, assuming everybody else is with us. So it's just forced us to try to clarify our thinking. So that has been a good exercise.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the district improvement plan? It's unanimous, the motion carries. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the continued work. Okay, we're finally going to get to the agenda item, our district, fiscal 24 budget calendar.
Since you're all in speakers.
It just worked out well. I'm gonna time it better someday. Pam, would you like to start off this discussion?
Now I gotta find the darn.
What?
Huh? I can start the discussion. You won't understand any of it.
So
Jar of peanut butter.
I sent you 2 documents to look at. One, I think I've sent you 6 times since the summer, and that's just the annual list of dates for our budget development process or our public development process. Basically, it's our setup for deliverables, and with the inclusion of a few workshop sessions that we'll spend with the school committee as we begin to look at the early variables and how they may impact our planning for the budget. The other document is the budget calendar with a column to generate some thought and discussion about how might we want to plan some engagement. And I put examples in, they're not recommendations even at this point, but so we know that the calendar is locked, right? So we will start in November, talking at this level about things like I even foreshadowed tonight. Like we're seeing some uncomfortable numbers in terms of inflation impacts on out-of-district tuitions. We know our utilities are higher than we budgeted for in February of last year because of the political environment and the war. We're hearing more and more about inflation. So what will that do? There's some early grumbling about healthcare being escalated this year. So by November, we're hoping to have some very preliminary high-level numbers from our healthcare provider, our healthcare broker, and general conversation with our statewide groups about where some of the big variables may land and what that may do to our planning for the budget and our anticipated deficit. What the document, the planning document has been provided is asking when do you want to start conversations with the community? Not knowing what conversation we're really having, right? Because what we start to learn in November and what we start to learn when we actually get budgets from the principals, which will come in end of October, and we synthesize them into a document that I'll bring to you in December, the superintendent's recommended budget. By the time we get to there, it's still very, very early in the process. But in December, we'll start to see what it looks like when we put some assumptions on paper and lock in. I don't know at that point if we truly know which direction we're going in terms of correction and what type of correction we might be asking for. And I think the type of correction may dictate the strategy. So that was a whole lot of dump. So we're about a month and a half, I think, out from starting to make some decisions, and potentially it's January when we're really deciding on the strategic way in which we want to position and ask to the two communities. So with that in mind, what are some things we can start to brainstorm about now in terms of planning for how we communicate where we are and where we're going?
And before we do that, could I just ask you to speak briefly to the difference between what we can do and what we can't do? Because I think that will help guide this conversation effectively.
So you're talking about if we decide to go for correction.
Yes, just generally speaking, whatever it is, whatever
So first of all, the correction, we're talking about correction, which is 3 steps down the line. And we're not going to ask for a correction per se. We're going to present a budget to the communities that may require them to ask for a correction. At that point, it would be a joint effort because we're all going to explain why it's a good idea, and we'll participate in that. But right now, I think our work over the next few months is just to clarify how big is our problem. Maybe the problem's gone away. Be optimistic, right? Maybe there's some miracle and the state comes up with some type of relief, knowing that we're all in the same boat. Probably not going to happen, so we know our starting point is at least $1 million. Once we get to January and we figure out whether it's 950, 1.5, 1.2, when we figure out the actual correction number and where the towns are and how they want to approach it, if the ultimate decision is that we're going to ask taxpayers for relief, meaning they've got to come to town meeting and vote with a 2/3 majority to put a tax override on the budget, then we have to discuss, is this a correction override, meaning we just want enough money to cover our deficit and then we'll start to rebuild from there? Are we going to ask for an aspirational override? You know, do we want to bundle in investments or buyback or replenishing of reserves in that, which will escalate the number? So once we get the number, then we come up with the strategy, right? Once the strategy is in play and we're locked to go forward for the override, in this committee votes to submit a budget that requires that, then we're hands off. We can't campaign, we don't promote, and we don't advocate for voting either way. We actually become just information providers. We can attend meetings, we can go to PTO meetings, we can go to school council meetings, we can go to town events and answer questions about the budget, but we can't advocate for a position one way or another. We'll have to enlist the help of a community group that usually forms to be our advocates and to run a campaign on our behalf. So there's plenty of literature when we get to that point. But our work right now is really figuring out what's the number and how are we going to collaborate with the towns to get to a number that keeps us moving forward, but also doesn't become so large that they're unable to cover it in whichever way they choose, right? And we could end up in a scenario where one town chooses an override in the public forum and one town chooses to use a combination of increased revenues or reserves. They don't have to be the same. So a lot of variables and a lot of information tossed at you, but it's a long way of saying there's a long way to go before we even know what the public conversation is going to be.
And to clarify, just point of clarification, that's okay.
Yeah.
We're not behind.
Yeah.
That's okay and appropriate given this process. All right, so your questions, please.
So will we need to then, when it comes time for the meeting to approve the budget, will we be approving a budget that's like $1 million over budget? in anticipation of, how will that work?
That's, I think, the December to February 2nd, or whatever date that is, the December to February conversation, which is, I see the scenario where we're preparing two budgets, one that shows the impact of not getting the revenue we need, and one that shows getting the revenue, and potentially a third one that shows some aspirational revenue. Then between December, January, and February, talking with the towns about what they'll endorse.
Okay.
Right, so our first goal will be to get the endorsements of the FinComs and the boards of selectmen to go forward with a budget that puts them into a position of either having to use reserves, alter their budgets on the town side, or seek a vote of the taxpayers to override the 2.5, Proposition 2.5. We need to see where they are on that and what number they will endorse to take one of those paths. So then you would approve a budget that basically puts that in motion. So we're gonna send them a budget that we know is above that 3.5 and above what they could potentially have available in revenue. But it'll be an agreement that we're going forward with a budget that's,
But could the town, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Follow-up.
No.
Could the town members then theoretically approve a budget with something aspirational in it, but then reject an override, or are those gonna be tied together kind of explicitly? I'm thinking just mechanically, like a town meeting, how that works.
they would be tied together. Unless we come up with something, I mean, that's a whole other strategy discussion, which
Okay.
is how do you
I just-
package the vote?
I'm just thinking like what we're gonna be, I'm just trying to think what we're gonna be.
We're gonna be asking them, there's one scenario where at town meeting, we would be asking them to approve a budget that requires a 2/3. At town meeting, we'll be asking them to approve a budget and approve us to go forward for a debt, a Prop 2.5 override.
Okay.
And we'll need 2/3 of the town meeting to vote to approve that.
Okay.
Then you only need 50% at the ballot. So the highest hurdle is gonna be town meeting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions, please?
So you mentioned that by November, we'll know some of the costs when it relates to like benefits and whatnot. When would the enrollment numbers come out? Is it October or November?
We'll have our enrollment number in October, and it's gonna be around 1250.
And that will be shared with the town incomes as well, so they'll have that too.
Yep.
Okay.
And just to clarify, in November, we might be able to get so we work with USI, they're our broker. We're going to start to lean on them to give us a projection of where they think healthcare numbers are going to be this year. We won't have an official healthcare number, the real healthcare number, until April or May, so after our budget's done. So we'll start in November, and every month they'll get a little clearer and a little clearer on it, where it may be, but it's typically late January, February, where we have some type of more realistic number that we'll feel comfortable plugging in. In the past, we've started around 10, so we'll 10% increase. We'll look back over the past few years. We'll take their temperature on, that's where we were at the beginning last year. We'll take their temperature on where they think the market's going. Market trend is the phrase that Avi uses. So what's the trend in the healthcare market in terms of renewals? We'll start to look, we have a HIAC group, so we have a health advisory group, which is a combination of, so Avi's on it, the HR director, I'll sit in on it, but there's also teacher reps. And they just kind of study the numbers. So they'll look at our profile, they'll ask our broker questions about how our profile is performing, whether there might be any numbers starting to pop that may put undue pressure on our renewal number. And again, November, December, January, February, it'll start to get refreshed and tightened as we head into budget season. But one of the big financial hurdles we faced was the year after the 2016 override. So spring of 2015, we passed an override for fiscal 16. We were in great shape, did all of the long-term planning, and we went.
Point of clarification, pass a
Correction.
correction because not both towns. did
Correct,
override.
so it was a correction. We were in great shape. We had a long-term plan, at least 10 years without any concerns. The next year, our healthcare increase came in at 28%. So it drained all of our available capacity right in the first year. The second year it came in at 16%. So we went with a 28%, 16% healthcare increase 2 years in a row following the first override. So that was something that has impacted our trajectory. We were hoping to get to the 10-year mark without needing to do a correction, and we're coming in when it's going to be the 8th year. So it sped it up a little bit.
So for,
That's a lot.
that is a lot. So for the purpose of kind
Can
of,
we, can we quickly just define, so our budget, our school district budget goes up every year,
Mhm.
right? What defines a correction? What percentage does our just district budget, not percentage to each individual town, but just, what percentage does our budget go up where we would then define it as a correction? Or is that,
I'm not hedging.
is that not an appropriate question?
It is an appropriate question. My answer is, when you start to get above 4%, we're putting pressure on the town. We break the model, is the phrase that we've used. So
That's a good way to-
they have a multi-year model, we have a multi-year model. And we know if we go over 3.5, we're getting kind of into the, yellow goes to orange, goes to red zone. And when we get over 4%, everyone says we've broken the model. Now, whether or not that requires a correction is a whole different question, right? Because they could have a year where their combined capacity is at 4.5 or 5%, so they have room. And it's about choices that all the entities want to make.
Yep.
So I think once we get to 4, we get to more difficult choices. But when we start getting over 5, 6%, I don't know that either of the towns have the capacity to reorganize their operational budgets to support us without going into their reserves, which is where you start to get into revenue correction discussions. Does that help?
That's very clear. Yeah, and I appreciate that.
And I need to put the disclaimer on it. This is Pam math. So these are my estimates. We haven't run tables. These aren't official numbers. Avi is very technical when he runs the numbers, and they're looked at, they're reviewed, they're processed, and he will give you the exacts. I'm giving you kind of my common sense estimates from working with it.
And I'm just asking a couple of questions, especially for our new members too, and just maybe to place some ideas in the committee's head. So is it worthwhile now just to discuss why? Should we discuss any history tonight as to, what we've been doing? Because I know, like, for instance, 80% of our budget, give or take, is staff. And that part of our budget, if we were to keep, for instance, level staffing and level services, that part of our budget alone, every year would be higher than 3.5% increase, right? And we've been
able to manage it to 3.5.
right, we've been able to manage it because we've created efficiencies that weren't there, right? And we've done a lot of work. Historically, our school budget has been very even for the past 10 years, and that's very different than it was, say, for the previous 10 years before that. I think part of the challenge that we're going to see rise this year is that process is no longer like, that process has run its course. Is that a good way to say it?
The only piece I would add is our target max is 3.5, but we very rarely exist at 3.5. We typically are asked to go lower and bring it closer to 3. So I think the modeling that we would like to try to do is, what does 10 years at 3.5 look like? Does that give us a stable income, so to speak, that prevents us from having to do the cuts? Because typically the cuts only come when we've dipped and tucked to get below 3.5 to manipulate the apportionment outcome. Right, so we go in at 3.5 and we're flat, but then when we run through the apportionment formula, it becomes lopsided, so to speak, between the two towns. And that 3.5 may turn into, for many years, it turned into like a 2.8 for Essex and a 3.9 for Manchester. So then the bargaining begins on how you actually get those numbers down. So we don't frequently stay at the 3.5 mark. And I think that's part of the negotiation discussion that we're having with the towns, which is, if we can agree that if we can produce a 3.5 and then you have to manage what the outcome of the apportionment formula is, we have a better chance of going a long stretch without having to make cuts. So I need to do a little homework to see how many years we were actually below 3.5 and what the financial cost of that was.
Sure, just broad strokes here,
Yeah.
just themes is what I'm talking about, right?
No, I agree.
And do all our new members understand like the apportionment and how that works at the high level?
I've asked Abby to give us a training on that, and I think that might be a good workshop. So I think it'll be beneficial for everybody.
There's been lots of opportunities for training and continued.
And he'll run through that when
He will do.
when we do the budget presentation in December, we can build in how the apportionment formula works.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
So I remember last time, I think Avi mentioned that facility, especially the high school, might be getting expensive, because of lifetime, like it's been many years.
Yep.
So is that gonna be the next year's, incorporating the next year budget or in future years?
So we have a report coming, Habib 2, for anyone who's around for Habib 1. We have the facilities report underway now for Essex in middle high school. The primary target, so to speak, is Essex, because we need a real clear picture on the potential costs of Essex Elementary maintenance over the next few years. So when will that roof need to be replaced? So we can factor all of that into what's the most appropriate timetable for this group to recommend for the replacement of Essex Elementary. And when I say replacement, it could be a renovation, it could be a full replacement, it's got to go through the MSBA process. But we're trying to figure out when the right time is to pull the trigger on submitting a statement of interest to the MSBA, knowing that sometimes it can take 3 years of submissions to actually get in the pipeline. We were very lucky at Memorial. We were in on the first try. We had a lot of extenuating circumstances, overcrowding at that point being one of them, which if they kind of do like a rubric score, you get more points if you're overcrowded. So we don't have that issue with Essex, but it's much older now.
Do we not have an overcrowding? I remember going on the tour there last spring and there were they're using closets and stage space.
Part COVID. Essex was built as a K-8, so it has physical space for students, and the overcrowding is students specifically. What Essex doesn't have is modern space. So it doesn't have the small group rooms, it doesn't have office space for OT, PT, so we've had to do a lot of makeshift work. When we went out for Memorial School, we were at the height of our enrollment bubble. They were at 430 students there, so another almost 200 more students than what they have now. And we had classrooms in converted locker rooms. So we were doing services in a tech closet with students. So students were receiving learning in a tech closet and in a modified shower stall. That escalated. It's just, we shouldn't be doing that. We just had no place to go. In that building, if you were ever in the old building, there is a very visual difference in its upkeep and ability. So it was the right choice by the numbers to go with Memorial first. I think Essex, everybody is,
So I'm not
Always quick to
arguing
remind-
that it wasn't the right choice. I'm just pointing out that
We just don't-
is crowding not an issue at Essex Elementary, right? According to their rubric, qualified.
right, I think there's plenty of space for the students. It's just not the kind of current space you would want. Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole.
Noting that, I would like to just, in the interest of time also, because these are very important questions and we have to make time for them. At the same time, I want to make sure that we accomplish what we're set out to before members have to leave. So I know, no, it's fine. So the budget calendar, recognizing now with the overview of where we're going and all of the unknowns that are still in play. Part of this, this third column, this ideas category here, recognizing that it's not like a campaign kind of thing. It's not us out campaigning for a thing, for an override or for anything like that. Part of the question, and we can choose either to discuss it. Actually, we can discuss it now. We might be on time to finish in our 2-hour window. So we can discuss it now, or we can just put it out for ideas for future thought, because I think we could probably make time in our next meeting's agenda, looking at what we have coming up, to then revisit. The big picture question here is, what do we want and need to take on in terms of public engagement and outreach, recognizing that it's not a campaign. So, and this is the structure that we are working with, that we have worked with. What, based on all of our, inputs and feelings over the past couple of years, things we've heard from people, things we've experienced, do we think is necessary, and that we as a committee have the bandwidth to put forth, so that we're not putting these things on someone else? What are the things that we have the bandwidth to put forth to the community? Is it something that we need to do? Do we think that that the structure that we have in place for engagement with public discussion, again, we don't have to decide all of this right now, but we can start asking the question, think about it, and have a more full discussion together when some of our committee members aren't pressed for time. So at the moment, let's do questions about that. Does everyone understand what the charge is?
And does everyone understand what the two public hearings are about? So you have two built-in dates for a public hearing on the budget. So a public hearing serves two purposes. It's an open community meeting at which we do a very brief budget presentation, and then the committee takes inputs from the public. Our primary public audience are the Finance and Board of Selectmen committees from both towns. They typically come. Those are typically our two joint meetings with them. So that's direct communication between the boards, and we get, depending on the year, a handful of people attend. So at those meetings, that's just open mic. Everybody can tell us, this is a good idea, that's not a good idea. Why didn't you look at this? You've not been attending to this, or, please bring back Spanish, whatever their plea is, or whatever their constructive criticism is, it's open mic. So none of the rules of a typical meeting.
Some of the
We typically, there is no deliberation. Deliberation happens at the next meeting when you process their inputs and use them to help you guide your decision making. So we do have two built-in forums, community meetings, whatever you want to call them, for that. I think the question is, do you want additional meetings like that? They could be virtual formats. We typically will do, when it's a big budget year, we have almost a templated series of articles that we can put out that outline what the budget season is, what it's about, and what's at stake. Previewing upcoming meetings where we want more people to come and attend. And then I'll try not to use typically, in the second half of the year, as we get into the meat of the budget, and we start to make some decisions, we may be able to do some articles that highlight some of the key variables that are putting pressure on the budget. Like, why do we have this problem? And talk about the healthcare numbers, or talk about the shifting enrollment, that even though the numbers are going, our head count is going down, our service needs are going up, and things like that. We won't know, we have a sense of what those things are every year, but we will know with greater detail how they're truly impacting the budget once we get into December and pull it all together.
So as a committee, are we in agreement that this is something that we could mull over and then have a more robust conversation about at our next meeting? Is that reasonable? Yep. Okay. Question, yeah?
Those public meetings, I've attended a bunch of those as a parent, community member. They are extremely frustrating because it's literally a finance conversation between this board and the town boards. And as a community member, I can see why nobody attends, because there's nothing in the budget discussion that relates back to strategic plans, or, right, it doesn't give you, I'd love to figure out how we connect the early part of this discussion, right, what we're trying to accomplish and why, with the budget. And I think this conversation we've just had, from the principals to Pam, your overview is a good example of how disconnected those are, right? It went from, here's what we're doing with kids, to healthcare costs, right? And somehow we need to help people see the relationship between what we're trying to accomplish with teachers and kids and the budget in a more productive way.
Go ahead.
I think that's true for a small portion of our population. I think it is unfortunately not true for a large population who just cares about, I don't know if that's a fair way of putting it, but I think that it's important to remember that there's a significant demographic that doesn't put the greatest value on what our outcome is, they're putting a higher value on what they're paying into it. That said, is this the kind of thing, Teresa, that we could all submit written feedback to and Pam could compile it so that we can discuss it in a more organized way?
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so let's agree to do that. I will send a reminder email out.
I'm feeling like, I'll just share. I feel like we try to create plans in advancement that aren't financially dependent too. So we can try to look at where we can draw the connections. I think the impacts maybe, there will have to be a discussion this time around, Jake, to your point, about the impact, because we'll be talking about increasing class size
Yeah.
as our way of cutting our way out of this. That's gonna directly start to talk about program delivery. You can, and that's where you can't do some of the things that we want to do in a class of 30. So I think, unfortunately, where we are may be so deep into cutting that there is no way for progress to continue unless we right the ship. So it's going to kind of be in that fine area between, it may not be a discussion about where we want to go, but just being able to stay afloat. And what staying afloat would look like in the new era if we have to pump up class size and eliminate some services.
And can I just make a comment about,
Very briefly, because we're closing.
I think at some point, that people vote us to know that, right? And know those first things. And I think that we can service a couple of themes around what's important for, all of our town stakeholders. And then communicate that through, because I think it's almost impossible to, I think no matter how we approach it, it's gonna be too frustrating it's too much to know. And we have subcommittees for this stuff, right? And I think to try and communicate it via public meeting like you're talking about, I'm not sure if I don't know, I just don't see a way to do it, but I could be wrong. But anyways, that was just my 2 cents there.
Well, let us have a more robust conversation about this in
Exactly,
our
yeah.
next meeting.
I
We'll see
I
if
have a
that's
couple of
possibility.
ideas too.
Yeah.
I have a couple ideas of where we can tie in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And there's nothing to vote on with the budget calendar. So thank you all for a productive conversation. We are into school committee comment. Does anyone have comment for tonight?
I just have a quick one.
Please.
My former colleague / acquaintance is the open door truck. And I stopped by, said hi, and seemed like it went well.
You did go really well.
Got feedback from him afterwards. He said it was great. I think just, if nothing else, just kind of the awareness that program exists and that it benefits the Cape End. I feel like I'm running a commercial for him right now, but no, it was just.
No,
cool.
actually, this is a really important point. So
Yeah,
keep
but
going.
just,
Yes.
My kids kept calling. We were at open house, like, are we really allowed to get stuff? Are we really,
Yeah.
should we really get stuff? It was
Yeah.
good.
oh
I
yeah,
was like,
dozen,
yeah, they're saying.
dozen and eggs. Yeah.
It was like, who wants some produce? So got plenty of fruit. My son came home with all of these pears.
Yeah, so just kudos to the community for doing that.
Kids felt so guilty. They're like, we have all the food.
Yeah, and I heard, as I was leaving open house here, I heard, they were trying to get teachers. It was kind of late and teachers going, well, is this really okay?
It's for
Is
everybody.
this, who's funding this? How is this happening? No, this is for everyone. And so I hope that we can help normalize using that as a community asset and resource. That's great.
Speaking of that, I think last time we talked about some of the food goes to waste for the lunch. So I think right now, Abby is looking to connect with the organization Green Bubbling to see how they can repurpose the food.
Yep. He's got a call scheduled. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. It is 7:28 and we are adjourned.
2 hours.
We need a
Do you need a
motion.
motion for that?
Oh, we need a,
Oh, yeah.
I was so confused.
Any discussion?
I was just settling in.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now we are adjourned.